I love their names. I love their names, and if I were to ever have been married and had a family and had twin sons, I would have named them that name. Eldad and Medad. Don't you love the names? Why, they're kind of like Cracker Jack names, but nonetheless, the names, why, they've always made me smile. Eldad and Medad. But even if you don't like the names, perhaps you've sometime in your life found yourself belonging to the Eldad and Medad Club. Have you ever had that experience? You know what I'm talking about. Eldad and Medad. They're the ones who are not in the tent. For whatever reason, maybe somebody didn't tell them, maybe they fell asleep, maybe they just were preoccupied with something else that was going on. But nonetheless, they weren't with the others in the tent. And because of that, there were some that were convinced, why even Joshua, son of Nun, who of course was Moses' right-hand man, why even Joshua was convinced that because they weren't in the tent, then the Spirit was not given to them. So you know what I mean when I say to belong to the Eldad and Medad Club. It means you're on the outside looking in. And people are convinced that you're not part of the in club. So they are convinced that Eldad and Medad don't have the Spirit, and yet it's Moses in his wisdom. It's Moses with the great insight that says to his right-hand man Joshua, oh, if everyone could be a prophet. Oh, if the Spirit could descend upon them all. Well, my friends in Christ, here is the good news tonight. The Spirit has descended upon us all. So even though we might have those opportunities where we feel part of the Eldad and the Medad Club, where we're on the outside looking in, you know, like I was in 7th grade, tall and skinny, and why, being forced by my mother to wear a pale yellow leisure suit when we went to church. And I looked like Big Bird. And there I was, standing in the midst of them all, thinking, what an idiot I am. If you've ever had those experiences, you know what Eldad and Medad were going through. And yet, God sees them. And I believe now God saw me back in 7th grade, who looked like Big Bird, differently. God saw in them and in me and in you why God sees in us greatness. And God gives to us His Spirit. It's upon us all. And yet, while we've also felt like the Eldad and Medad Club, sometimes we are also on the other side. We are the ones in the tent. And we are convinced that there are certain people that just don't belong, and then when they do want to belong, why then, of course, oftentimes we might find fault with them. And of course, while it's never happened here at the Church of St. Mary in Wilmer, I'm sure it's happened in other churches all around the world. You know what I'm talking about. It's when we try to be helpful, and in trying to be helpful, sometimes we get in the way. Example. Sometimes we belong to an organization such as the church, and we get involved, and because we're involved, we get used to doing things, and we become part of the group that always does this thing. And then somebody from the outside volunteers, says, I would like to help. Well, they come and they help, but they don't do it the way we've always done it. And they might have a different idea of how it might be done. And then, of course, we we criticize. And we in the tent are convinced that they should get a life, that somehow they should see it our way, that they should do it this way because this is the way it's always been done here. My friends in Christ, the good news of the readings today is that all loners and losers, all people who have felt themselves to be on the outside looking in, all people who are convinced that somehow the Spirit hasn't descended upon them, and the good news is for all those who are convinced that the Spirit has belonged to them but it hasn't belonged to other people, the good news is quite simply this: God's Spirit is in us all. And because that Spirit is in us, we are called to prophesy. We are called to live our lives in service to the gospel. We are called to do the work that needs to be done, to be able to remove from ourselves that which causes us and others to sin, even if it means cutting things off and plucking things out of our life. Those things that keep us from recognizing that the Spirit needs to work in and through us. In our efforts to be helpful, oftentimes our motivations get in the way. And our motivations become that we need to be important, that we need to be recognized, that we need to be great, and because of that, other people need to be less important, and other people need to be not as great as we are. And there, my friends, is where our motivations to be helpful get in the way of the Spirit that needs and does and continues to work in and through us. And not just us, but everyone. So whether we happened to be in the tent at the right time, at the right place, whether we happened to be part of the in group designated by whomever, the important thing is that God is relying on you and I. He's relying on you and I to share his life, to share his love, to share his presence in simple and humble ways, by being disciples who aren't worried about importance or greatness or honor or whatever it might be, but simply to be disciples who go out and not only prophesy and tell others about how God has been at work in our life, but also to invite others in. How else will others know that the Spirit has descended upon them as well, unless you and I are able to tell them that, to remind them of that, and invite them to share that Spirit in their own way, whether they're part of the tent or not. So for those times when we have felt part of the Eldad and Medad Club, we are reminded today that the Spirit has been given to us as well. And for the times that we have excluded others, we ask for the Lord's mercy and forgiveness, so that we might recognize that we all need to prophesy, because the Spirit has been given to us all.